Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents From This Day Forward by Layne, narrated by Vanessa Daniels. Chapter 1. If Leah McHale had learned anything in her decade as a wedding photographer, it was that Sunday mornings were meant for sleeping in. This was especially true when last night's wedding had involved the bridal party taking tequila shots and insisting they'd pay her extra for photographing the drunken train wreck until 3 a.m. In other words, Sunday brunch was rarely an option for Leah. Today, however, Leah made an exception. Because when a friend, who also happened to be owner of the most elite wedding planning company in Manhattan, asked you to meet her at a trendy West Village hotspot at 11:30 on a Sunday morning, you didn't say no. Alexis Morgan was already seated at the restaurant when Leah arrived, which came as zero surprise, since the wedding planner thought being late should count among the deadly sins, nestled right alongside sloth. Leah smiled in thanks as the hostess pointed out Alexis's table on the patio and wound her way through the crowded mess of sidewalk tables until she reached her friend. Alexis was writing something in her ever-present day planner, but the second she saw Leah, she gave one of her small, trademark, "I have a secret" smiles, shutting the planner before standing for a hug. "Leah, you look lovely." Stop," Leah said, giving the smaller woman a squeeze. "I'm not one of your brides to be pampered and fluffed. You can tell me the truth. I look tired, and I've gained 7 pounds since we last hung out." "Nonsense." Alexis fluttered her napkin to her lap as they both sat down. "I never know which one I'm more jealous of, that gorgeous red hair or those curves." "Yeah, well," Leah patted her padded hip. "The curves are real. The hair, not so much." "Really?" Alexis said in surprise, leaning forward and studying Leah's hairline curiously. "That's not your real color?" Leah shrugged and took a sip of her water. "It used to be. I was one of those girls that the other kids called Carrot Top on the playground. But somewhere in my 20s, the bright orange decided it wanted to be more of a muddy copper. So let's just say I, enhance it." "No judgment here." Alexis lifted a pink manicured finger to her own shiny dark hair. "These roots aren't my own either. Prematurely gray even though I'm 33. Tell anyone I cut you." Leah let out a surprised laugh. Alexis Morgan had always reminded Leah of a badass Audrey Hepburn. She had the same slight figure and wide brown eyes as the iconic Hollywood starlet. But whereas there'd be a sweetness to Audrey, Alexis was fierce. Kind, definitely. Loyal, for sure. But if Audrey Hepburn was the type to soothe you during the teary phase of a bad breakup, Alexis was the quiet revenge friend. The one you called when you needed a kick in the pants to get your life back on track. "Mimosa's your day drink of choice, right?" Alexis asked, motioning a server over with a subtle lifting of her hand. The waiter was by their table in seconds. "Mimosa for my friend, and I'll take a Bloody Mary, heavy on the horseradish," Alexis said. "For some reason it always catches me off guard that you're a vodka in the morning type of girl," Leah said after the waiter had walked away. Alexis lifted a slim shoulder. "Let's just say I get more than enough champagne during the workday. It's nice to take a break." Leah patted her friend's hand. "It's a rough life, dear. All that Veuve Clicquot you're forced to sip with your clients." Alexis tilted her head, her long brown ponytail draping over a slim shoulder. "Surely you get the occasional glass of bubbly yourself." Leah shrugged. "It's often offered, but I don't like the view on the other end of the lens getting blurry." Alexis nodded. "Rumor has it you've been busy lately." Leah cracked her neck and wished she'd had just one more cup of coffee before this brunch. "Aren't we all? I keep thinking that one of these years the June bride thing will go out of style, but nope. I'm already booked 3 Junes out. What is that?" "Tradition, combined with you being one of the best photographers in the city," Alexis said as the server placed their drinks in front of them. "Uh-oh, you're busting out the trademark Morgan flattery," Leah teased. "Whatever you called me here for must be big." Alexis used her straw to stir her drink before lifting wide brown eyes to Leah's. The Kowalski-Shrapner wedding you were working next weekend was called off. Leah's eyes narrowed. True. Turns out the bride and the best man had a thing. But how do you know that? I thought Wedding Bells passed on that one. The Wedding Bells was Alexis Morgan's wedding planning company. Although company was perhaps an inadequate term. It was more like an empire, and one that Leah was darn grateful to be connected with. She had enough faith in her skills to know she could support herself either way, but it definitely didn't hurt to be one of Alexis Morgan's go-to photographers. Not only did it mean more weddings, it meant big weddings. And big money. We did turn it down, Alexis confirmed, taking a sip of her drink. I didn't have a good feeling. And it's a good thing, too, because we ended up booking the Preston wedding for that same weekend. Leah shook her head. Only you could look so perfectly chill about the fact that you've been planning the president's daughter's wedding. Former president. Details schmeetails, Leah said with a wave of her hand. It was true. The bride wouldn't technically be the first daughter on her wedding day, but President Preston had ended his second term just within the past year. So in the eyes of the press, Kylie Preston was still very much America's sweetheart. What's Kylie like anyway? Leah asked. She always seems so sweet and shy on camera. She's sweet and shy in real life too, although the shyness fades when she's around Brent. Leah shook her head. Wouldn't you just figure that the president's daughter and the son of the richest man in New York would become college sweethearts? An uncharacteristically dreamy look stole over Alexis's eyes. It works that way sometimes. Leah's snort slipped out before she could help it. It wasn't that she didn't believe in true love. She totally did. One didn't make it to age 31 as a wedding photographer without trusting that at least some of the couples would make it to happily ever after. It was just that it never seemed to work that way for her, despite the fact that Leah continued to put herself out there, trying every sort of wretched dating app on the planet and gamely agreeing to every blind date her friends could rummage up. She had yet to feel the thing, that elusive combination of wanting to see someone naked and wanting to wake up beside him the next morning. For Leah, it was usually one or the other. Either she met exactly the type of guy she could laugh with and didn't feel even a flash of attraction for, or there was a guy who completely revved her lady bits, but with whom she had nothing in common. Except that wasn't entirely true. The emotional and physical attraction had overlapped once, but the disastrous consequences of that short-lived fling had been painful enough that she was, well, skeptical. Do you have any plans for your unexpectedly free weekend? Alexis asked as she perused the menu. Leah's eyes narrowed on her friend. Alexis Morgan might be the queen of poker face, but Leah had known Alexis for close to a decade now. She knew when she was being handled, and right now, Alexis was definitely working up to something. Instead of answering the question, Leah took a sip of her mimosa and waited. When Alexis's brown eyes flicked up to hers, Leah merely lifted her brows, waited some more. With a sigh, Alexis set the menu aside and folded both arms on the table, leaning toward Leah. I need a favor. Anything, Leah said automatically, meaning it completely. Her relationship with Alexis may have started as a business arrangement. They'd both arrived in the city 10 years earlier, with big plans of pursuing their dream careers. But somewhere along the way, Alexis and Leah had transitioned from sometimes business associates to friends. Alexis had been there for Leah when she'd needed her, and Leah fully intended to repay the favor in any way she could. I need you to work the Preston wedding. Leah blinked. The Preston wedding? As in, the wedding of the former first daughter we were just talking about? The one this weekend? Alexis nodded. Leah sat back, stunned. Holy crap, Lex. That's not really doing me a favor, hun. More like the other way around. This would be the opportunity of a lifetime for me, for any photographer. I know, but I still hate asking last minute like this. If it were up to me, I'd have recommended you from the very beginning. But Kylie's college roommate and her husband are a two-person photographer team, and Kylie wanted to give the opportunity to her friend. So what happened? They had a falling out? Alexis shook her head. They live in San Francisco, and she's a few months pregnant. There was some complication. She's been put on bed rest. Nothing serious, just a precaution. But ergo, she's certainly not going to be flying to New York anytime soon, and certainly can't be photographing a wedding. Ugh, that sucks, Leah said sympathetically. Alexis smiled. This is why I knew you were right for the job. You get it. You get people. Leah rolled her eyes. You hardly have to sweet-talk me into taking a job that's likely to be the highest-profile wedding of my career. Alexis glanced down at her Bloody Mary, stirring a pickled green bean. Well, there is one tiny thing I haven't mentioned. Bring it. Alexis looked up. It's a huge wedding. One photographer's not going to cut it. Leah waved her hand. Oh, please. My ego's not so big I can't handle a little teamwork. Who else you bringing in? Alexis bit her lip, and Leah tensed at the rare unease she saw on her usually confident friend's face. Alexis leaned forward and touched her arm. Leah, you have to know how impossible it is to book one good photographer on short notice in June, much less two, and I'm counting myself lucky because two of the best happen to be available. But what? Leah asked, her heart pounding faster as she somehow knew what her friend was trying to say. Knew whose name Alexis was terrified to say. Alexis's gaze cut away from hers and fell somewhere over Leah's shoulder, even as Leah felt the shiver of awareness that someone else had stepped into her personal space. Alexis glared at the newcomer. You're early, Rhodes. Leah's heart stopped just for a moment. Slowly, she turned around and glanced up into the dark brown eyes of Jason Rhodes. He pulled a toothpick from his mouth and gave her a slow, sexy once-over. Hiya, Red. Long time. Leah could only shake her head. It had been a long time, but not nearly long enough. Not only was he the one man on the planet she could absolutely, positively not work with, he was the one man who Leah had let in close enough to break her heart. Chapter 2. Jason Rhodes had never been particularly into politics. Sure, he voted, kept up on current affairs, but most of the time he thought whatever the hell went on in D.C. was 80% bullshit. Still, even he knew that working the wedding of Kylie Preston was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the type of resume booster that could get your work featured in People magazine and ensure that you were in business for life. But that wasn't why Jason had said yes when Alexis Morgan had called and offered him the job. Not the main reason, anyway. No. The main reason he'd agreed was because of a tall, curvaceous, red-haired siren who came with the package, and who was currently sitting in the reception area of the bed and breakfast Jason had just checked into. Jason had been about to head up to his room, but the second his eyes locked on Leah nursing a glass of white wine, her drink of choice when she was stressed, he recalled, the red was reserved for when she wanted to let loose. He found himself juggling the key in his palm before heading in her direction. It was stupid. Suicide, really. Especially considering their brunch meeting less than a week earlier had ended with her very deliberately dumping a glass of ice water in his crotch. And yet, even though Jason would bet serious money that he was on a kamikaze mission by even approaching, staying away from Leah McHale when she was this close seemed like a non-option. He was the helpless moth to her curvy, prickly, hot-as-sin flame. It was too bad the feeling was not mutual. She'd made that perfectly clear the day she'd walked out on him a year ago, without so much as a glance over her shoulder, without giving him a chance to explain. Stubborn, wretched woman. And yet here he was, walking toward her and actually looking forward to it, even though he knew the reception he was due to receive would be far from warm. Moth, meet flame. Unlike the large corporate hotels that dominated Manhattan, the ritzy oceanfront inn where the bride's family had put them up held no sleek bar or endless array of seating options. Just a small bar cart set up in the corner, where guests were free to help themselves, and a handful of tables meant for quiet conversation or solitude. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Leah with her white wine and her iPad, was hoping for the solitude option. It gave him great pleasure to disrupt her. She glanced up just as he dropped his bag to the floor beside her feet and settled on the chair across from her. "Hiya, Red." Her gray-green eyes remained perfectly stoic as she took a sip of wine and slowly set the glass back on the table. "Rhodes." Jason reached across the table to where her hotel key sat near her elbow, grabbing it before she could stop him. No plastic key cards for this classy joint. The keys themselves were old-fashioned and metal, but Jason didn't give a shit about the key itself. He flipped over the silver plate that indicated her room number. Perfect. With a slow grin, he held up his own key, room 8 to her room 7. "Neighbors. Think they have thin walls?" "Gosh, I hope so," she gushed sarcastically, taking another sip of wine, slightly larger than the last, he noticed. "It'll be so much fun for me to hear whatever adolescent girl you manage to pick up giggle when she sees the tiny little thing you've got masquerading as a penis." Jason narrowed his eyes as he pulled the ever-present cinnamon Tic Tac case from his front jeans pocket. He flipped the lid open with a thumb, watching Leah as he tilted 3 of the little candies into his mouth. The tip of her tongue flicked out almost subconsciously, touching the center of her bottom lip briefly, before she jerked her gaze away. He wondered if she was remembering his taste as vividly as he remembered hers. "Still on those, huh?" she asked, jerking her chin toward the Tic Tacs. Jason lifted a shoulder in confirmation. The red breath mints had started out as a replacement for cigarettes, back when he'd quit smoking 8 years earlier. He rarely got the urge for a smoke anymore, but the craving for cinnamon was constant, especially when he was agitated. And being around Leah McHale ensured that he was always agitated. Leah blew out a tiny, irritated sigh. "Look, I thought we agreed that we'd do this job with as little contact as possible." "Huh," he said, leaning forward. "See, that's not how I remember it. I actually remember showing up at the restaurant for a business meeting, just in time to watch you have a temper tantrum over a misunderstanding that happened a year ago." "Misunderstanding?" Her voice went low and angry as she leaned forward. "A beautiful woman opens your boyfriend's front door at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, wearing nothing but a shirt that I bought you. Tell me how I misunderstood that." Jason leaned forward, happy to meet her confrontational posture. "Easy there, Red. You missed your chance to let me explain that when you ran away and then dodged my phone calls for a month." It still burned. And Jason had never been the type to lick his wounds. Not when an endless string of foster families had kicked him to the curb. Not when his biological mother had reappeared out of nowhere, only to disappear when she realized that playing mom to a surly 13-year-old boy wasn't as fun as she'd expected, throwing him back into the loop of temporary families all over again. Not even when his Army Ranger career had ended in the blink of an eye, when an Afghan car bomb killed several of his friends and destroyed Jason's knee in the process. But Leah's desertion, that had stung. Not only because he'd thought they'd had something, but because she'd made it very clear that Jason Rhodes wasn't worth even an ounce of complication. He was used to it by now. Mostly. But damn, if this woman didn't ignite a temper he didn't even know he'd had, since the day he'd laid eyes on the stunning redhead in a photography shop on 18th and 6th. Jason had been helpless against her pull on him, and before he could register his intention to talk to her, he was standing in front of her, asking her to grab a cup of coffee. Coffee had led to a good-natured debate on the merits of Nikon versus Canon cameras, which had led to lunch, which had led to dinner, which led to the hottest affair of Jason's life. Nothing had burned hotter than him and Leah together. And nothing had been quite so cold as the year that followed, when Leah had iced him out of her life entirely. Until now. Now she would be within arm's reach for the next 3 days, and for the life of him, Jason wasn't sure what he wanted to do about that. Or rather, he did know, but his body and his brain had very different plans in mind. His body was demanding he take her by the hand, drag her to one of their respective rooms, and put his hands on every inch of that pale, smooth flesh. His brain wanted to punish her, wanted to swipe at her the way she seemed determined to swipe at him, as though they were two enemies on the grade school playground. As for his heart, his heart. Damn thing had done nothing but gotten him into trouble. Look, Rhodes. He held up a finger to halt whatever stick-up-the-ass comment she was going to fling his way, and crossed toward the small bar cart in the corner of the room. He splashed some bourbon in a glass for himself, before pulling the white wine bottle out of the ice bucket and crossing back to her. Leah didn't protest when he refilled her glass. She even managed a surly thank you. When he sat back down, he lifted his glass toward her. She rolled her eyes. What do we possibly have to toast to? How about the fact that we've made it nearly 5 minutes without you losing that darling temper of yours and throwing water on my crotch? Leah gave him a withering look. That's what you want to toast to? The fact that you have a dry crotch? Well, I'd toast to your dry crotch, but I don't know that you have one, do you, Red? That's lovely, she said, taking a small sip of her wine. I'm sure former President Preston is going to be just thrilled when he learns he hired the country's crudest man-whore to photograph his daughter's wedding. Is that why you accepted the job? He asked, enjoying the way the smoky bourbon mingled with the cinnamon aftertaste of his tic-tac. Fame? Honestly, Leah lifted a shoulder. Yeah, I mean, I had a free weekend, so I likely would have jumped at any job that Alexis threw my way, but only one this high-profile and high-paying could coax me into working alongside you. Jason sat back and smirked. I love that Alexis didn't give you any warning. A little line appeared between Leah's angular eyebrows, and he knew it pissed her off royally that she'd been blindsided at brunch last weekend, whereas he'd come in with a bit of forewarning. She was trying to before someone had to go and show up early, Leah muttered. Maybe she just knows that if given the chance, you'll avoid hard situations. You're a runner, he stated simply, idly spinning his glass on the table. She touched her fingers to her temple, eyes closing for a moment. Can we not do this? For the rest of the weekend, can we just avoid each other as much as possible and limit our conversation to who's going to photograph what? Jason felt a stab of anger low and hot in his stomach. After a year, he should have written her off. He should have been able to put their fling behind him. And yet seeing her now, that familiar red ponytail that he'd used to wrap around his fist to pull her to him, he fished out another tic-tac, studied her. I'll leave you alone for the rest of the weekend, he said slowly, hating the way her eyes flashed in relief at the thought of not having to deal with him. If. Just like that, her relief turned to wariness, and he felt an odd thrill, knowing that he could still do this to her, that he could still unnerve her as easily as she unnerved him just by breathing. If what? Leah asked, eyes narrowed. If you'll have dinner with me. She was already shaking her head no when he reached across the table, laying his hand alongside hers so his thumb could rub along her little finger. His pulse leapt. That simple, harmless touch, and he was seconds away from being hard. And he knew from the way her breathing quickened that she felt it too. Whatever it was. Come on, Red, he said, moving his finger just briefly so the edge of his nail nudged her knuckle. Wedding events don't start until the crack of dawn tomorrow. Give me tonight. Leah slowly pulled her hand away from his, dropping both hands to her lap, and Jason swallowed his disappointment. It was time to get over her. Time to stop thinking that she might ever... Okay. His head snapped up, his eyes locking on her green eyes. Okay? She calmly lifted her wine glass, not breaking eye contact as she took a sip. Okay, I'll have dinner with you, but as a working dinner, not a date. I'm convinced we can figure out how to work together in spite of our thorny past. He resisted the urge to pump his fist in triumph, and Leah lifted a warning finger. Again, dinner. I'm not sleeping with you. Jason picked up his bourbon and threw it back in one swallow before standing and grabbing his bag. Before Leah had a chance to react, he'd moved toward her, shamelessly invading her personal space as he bent down and placed his lips near her ear. "Sweetheart, by the time I'm done with you, sleep will be the last thing on your mind. Guarantee it." Chapter 3. The first time Leah had seen Jason Rhodes, she'd lost a little part of her soul. Or at the very least, a little part of her dignity. Never in her 31 years had she encountered a man who'd been able to turn her on just by looking at her. But then she'd walked into the camera shop on a random Tuesday, and just like that, she'd become one of those women. The kind that wanted sex all the time, wanted it now, and wanted it with him. The problem was, Leah was far from the only woman who had that response to Jason Rhodes. The man was pure fantasy material. Tan skin, perfect white teeth that were displayed to perfection in a cocky, come-hither grin, ever-present stubble that gave him a just-crawled-out-of-bed look. He had black hair that he kept short, likely a holdover from his military days, and his eyes were the color of the richest, most decadent dark chocolate. Jason Rhodes had been out of her league then and now, and yet here he was, whining and dining her as though she mattered, as though he hadn't been doing this very thing last week with some other woman, and wouldn't be doing it next week with yet another woman. No, the danger in Jason wasn't just that he was charming, although he was, hopelessly so. The problem was he made her feel special. Wanted. Once upon a time, she'd loved that feeling. Now she knew that it was just that, a feeling, and one that wasn't based on a scrap of fact. She wasn't special, not to Jason. She'd learned that the hard way when she'd shown up at his apartment with his favorite breakfast sandwich and her heart on her sleeve, only to realize that while she'd spent Saturday night at a rowdy wedding in Queens, shoving her way through the crowd to get the perfect shots, he'd had his own rowdy night in bed with a gorgeous brunette. Leah would do well to remember that moment, standing on his porch, her dignity in pieces at her feet. She would be smart to remember the way her heart had literally hurt when she'd realized that the man she'd been falling in love with had been sleeping around on her. Because right now, when he was sitting across the table from her, making easy conversation, even as he occasionally reached over to scoop up a bite of her risotto as though it were his right, it was hard to remember that he was a complete pig. Hell, she wasn't even sure how the heck they'd ended up there. She'd assumed dinner would be a quick bite at the hotel, but somehow she found herself in one of the trendiest restaurants in town, sharing a meal that felt very much like a date. "So, tell me what you've been up to in the year you've been avoiding me, Red," he said as he topped off both of their glasses with an excellent Bordeaux. "You mean in the year since you decided to cheat on me?" she shot back, not liking the way he continually spun their murky history to be entirely her fault. His brown eyes flashed anger then, but she held up a hand to stop whatever he was going to say. I know, okay? We never agreed to be exclusive. I've spent the past several months trying to train my brain to remember that, so let's just let it go." "Leah?" Her stomach flipped a little. He'd only ever called her Leah in bed. Otherwise, it was always Red. "Please don't," she whispered. The anger faded from his gaze, and his mouth flattened with something that looked like resignation. "Fine." She swallowed. "You asked how I was." He nodded slowly, and she felt a little stab of gratitude that he wasn't going to force them down memory lane. "I've been good," she said, swirling her wine. "Really good. Busy. But then I guess that's the perk of our line of work, right? People will never stop falling in love." The corner of Jason's mouth tilted up in amusement. "I forgot how you did that." "Did what?" "Romanticize what we do." Leah tilted her head. "Well, it is romantic. We get to watch people promise to stay together forever." "Well, sure. That's what they promise." And I'd forgotten how you did that, Leah said, sprinkling.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?